Still with me is a retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. He's a senior advisor at Vote Vets. And, you know, often with guests who write important books, we book them to talk about their important book. And this is a brand new book, The Folly of Realism, How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. But in this particular instance, there's no separation between the conversation we were just having and your book, except for the fact that we were joking that the subtitle is How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine, and that maybe you should change that to how the West deceives itself about Russia and betrayed Ukraine, because this isn't history, this is current. Tell me what the deception is. When you were writing this book, what is the deception you feel that we have about Russia and the betrayal of Ukraine?
Sure. So the folly is the fact that we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over. We're short-sighted about Russia. They put bright, shiny objects in front of us. Like right now, it's a bright, shiny object of peace. That's not going to happen. Because Russia constantly breaks its agreements. It's broke them in 94, in 14. I mean, there's just so many different agreements that it broke over the years. So that's the folly. We do this because Russia is a large country. It's got a massive nuclear arsenal. It had a powerful-looking military up until 3 years ago where the Ukrainians wrecked it. And we succumbed to hopes and fears, hopes that we could do more with them, like a ceasefire, or fears that somehow the relationship is going to devolve. World War III, you heard that play out in the Oval Office yesterday. And the Russians are extremely effective at wielding this. And we make short-sighted decisions constantly, one after the other, whether it was about Ukraine's independence and George H.W. Bush suppressing that urge, and the Ukrainians saying, we're going to do it anyway. Just months later, he gave his famous Chicken Kiev speech. The Ukrainians voted overwhelming 90% voted to leave. Or denuclearization. We initially put massive pressure on Ukrainians, and they were like, no, we're not going to mortgage our security. But when we enticed them with the economic aid that they needed and some assurances, not quite the same thing as guarantees, came on board. Or the Orange Revolution, where the Russians started to graduate from just mischief-making economic coercion to outright, hybrid warfare and interference in elections. We could have made a pivot because this was a pro-Western Ukrainian leader that was elected. We could have made a hard pivot to invest in Ukraine, harden Ukraine, and condemned Russia for its election interference back then. Rhymes quite a bit. And we didn't, because there was a bright, shiny object of cooperating on international terror, defeating international terror. Same thing through 2014, multiple resets all along the way. Trump might not call this one a reset, but it's the same kind of pattern of resets. What we should be doing is focusing on what really matters. We should be focusing on democracies. Those are the things that give us kind of bedrock support when we're under threat. Our fellow democracies were there for us at 9/11. They're our most important, most robust trading partners. We should be investing in hardening democracies, nurturing struggling democracies. Ours is one of them now. And frankly, supporting democratic institutions. That is the long-term play that allows us to navigate past these really bright, shiny objects in front of us.
And you distinguish that the realism, the folly of realism is what you're saying, advancing U.S. interests versus neo-idealism, which you are saying should be a sort of a moral or a democratic approach to because Ukraine in the world you talk about was doing all those things. They were trying to gain democracy. It was later than a lot of post-Soviet states, but they were trying to get it. We needed to nurture that. Ukraine would have been in a very strong position today, and we gave them guarantees. They gave up their nukes in exchange for their territorial integrity, and nobody stood up to them.
Yeah, no, that's very true. We made mistakes. If we had some wishful thinking in the 1990s, there was a lot of hope at the end of the Cold War. By the time you get this KGB colonel in power that's running the country, and there's all sorts of democratic backsliding inside the country, illiberalism, attack on media, we should have seen the telltale signs. They graduated from there to war against one of their neighbors in Georgia. They graduated from there to seizing territory in Ukraine. We didn't do much in the way of either condemnation. We did some, relatively modest sanctions, but we didn't do enough to harden Ukraine because we wanted to normalize relationships. The fact is that there are alternatives. This school of neo-idealism, this idea that, U.S. could still recapture its moral leadership down the road, seems like a far-fetched notion now. But when we look where you look 4 years down the road, we are swinging so far away from our roots, from our values, from our alliances now under Trump, that the next president that comes in, when we reject this era, the next president is going to have to capture some sort of vision for the future. Yeah. And that's one where values are central to our interests. It's a ways off, but just the natural correction. Pendulum swings hard to the right. It's going to have to swing and correct itself. And that's going to be enormous opportunities for the U.S. I think domestically and abroad.
I will take that ounce of optimism that you're providing, and thank you for that. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman is the author of a very important new book called The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Congratulations.